A growing number of journalists have to flee their home countries. The reasons? Increasing censorship, repression, imprisonment, or threats against their lives and families. But living in exile comes with its own set of challenges. How can journalists in exile adapt and establish themselves between their audiences, the diaspora community, and the new culture? Going deep, stranger in a strange land, exile journalism on the rise.
And it's my great pleasure to welcome four wonderful, courageous journalists. Our first guest is one of Turkey's most distinguished journalists. He was editor-in-chief of the centre-left newspaper Cumhuriyet until 2016, when he fled political persecution and survived an assassination attempt. Today he lives in Germany. Please welcome Can Dündar. Hey. Our second guest is an Afghan journalist who founded Rukshana Media, which is a feminist outlet which tells the stories of Afghan women. After Kabul fell to the Taliban, she was evacuated to the UK, where she lives and works today. She was one of Time magazine's Women of the Year in 2022. Zara Joya. Our next guest is a former investigative journalist and anchor from Ukraine. She left Kyiv with her family days after Russia invaded her country and worked at Radio Bremen, producing and delivering news in Ukrainian. And today she's working at DW. Please welcome Anna Chaika. And our final guest fled persecution from Eritrea, where he worked in the 1990s as a journalist and later as a diplomat. Today, from France, he writes there, and he also launched Radio Erina's Arabic language program, which provides independent news to Eritreans. Please welcome Fatih Osman. So welcome to all of you, and I just would like to mention that we will hopefully be able to take some questions if you submit them online, but we will try and leave enough time at the end for questions to our guests. I kind of want to start by getting an idea of what exile means to each of you. You have very individual circumstances, and Can Dündar, I would like to start with you by reading out something that you said once. You said, "Exile is a reality of our time. It's a problem of our new age, and I am part of this problem." Tell us what you meant when you said that.
To be honest, I felt as an exile in my own country while I was imprisoned or shot at. So let me quote Adorno here, to those who no longer has a homeland, exile has become a home. So for me, it's the same. I mean, as a writer or a reporter, if you cannot speak freely, if you cannot write freely in your own country, so you feel exiled, even in your own country. But here, I can speak freely, so this is my new home. So the definition is problematic, I guess, in that sense. Of course, our roots are in our own country. We are unrooted here, but at least we can give a voice to the voiceless in our own country.
Mm. Zara Joya, that's something you're doing, giving a voice to women through Rukshana Media, your feminist media outlet. You were able to flee the Taliban and live in the UK, where you have continued your work. What has that experience been like, and what sorts of challenges have you come up against?
Well, I'm speaking in front of you today with nothing. I lost my country. I lost my voice, my real voice inside of the country. But I have one thing, the power of words, the power of soft words, that we try to amplify the voice of people, of marginalized group who are forced to be silent. For me, as a female journalist, from a country that unfortunately it is a woman, my fellow woman living in under gender apartheid regime, is to raise the awareness and inform the world what is happening in that country.
We also know that women in Afghanistan are, they're not just sitting idly by, they are, when they can, trying to demonstrate, they are trying to organize on social media, often at great risk to themselves. You feel a deep responsibility to tell their stories.
Definitely. It is a big responsibility under my shoulder and other fellow Afghan journalists, those who work in exile. Fortunately, we have a number of journalists and media outlets who are staying abroad, and they documenting the events and the brutal of the Taliban behavior for the history and the next generation. So for me, as a female journalist, as a founder of Sürgün Media, that this has a big responsibility, is to give them a platform, the women, the people who lost their fundamental rights during this almost 2 years. Most of them, especially women and girls, they are arrested at home. They are not able to go outside with male mahram, and also they are not able even to wear what they want. So that's, I think, for me and other fellow Afghan journalists, is big responsibility that we should work now in this moment and document what is what we tell the next generation of my country.
Fatih Osman, I'd like to move on to you, and I was struck by something you told me when we were preparing for this, and this is sort of giving the African context to exile, and you said to me that being an exiled African journalist is determined by a factor of fear, and that fear is directly related to whether you're exiled within the continent or outside of it. Could you explain that?
Thank you for having me. I'm originally from Eritrea, the country that swaps places with North Korea at the bottom of the freedom of press for almost 10 years or more. In Eritrea, we have journalists who are incarcerated, imprisoned, since 18 December 2001. Just 1 week after September 11, when the world eyes were towards New York, and the president knew that no one will just do anything, he rounded up all journalists in Eritrea, and from that day on, we don't have free press in the country. It's one TV channel, one radio, and one newspaper. It's the version of truth of the government. Now, exile, those who managed to get out of the country suffered exile, and it meant uprootedness. Just to be uprooted from your environment, from your family, from your source of news and stories. You are outside. What does it mean to be outside for an African journalist? 2 dimensions. To be outside in Africa, or to be outside in Europe or the US or Australia. To be outside in Africa, especially the neighboring countries, you can be gotten, you can be taken. Those who were in Sudan, or the Eritrean journalists who fled to Sudan or to Ethiopia, it was only a bottle of whiskey for a security officer to just round up someone and send him back to Eritrea, where he disappears forever. They are consumed by fear because they know that they are not far. And we have an expression, the hand of the government is long. So they can catch you, they can get you, they pay the money and everything. Now, this is one aspect. When you go to Europe, to the US, you have another kind of exile experience. When you get here, you are not a journalist. You are a refugee first. Let's talk about you as a refugee. Then, let's see, what is your profession? But I'm a journalist, and that's why I became a refugee, and this should entitle me to a protection, or a special kind of protection. Let's forget about that. Let's just deal with you. This is what happens when you get here. You get to Germany, or France, Sweden, or anywhere, you are new to the language, to the environment, and you don't get support. So is it to practice journalism or to leave first? This is a question also when you come far from your country.
Anna, I would like to turn to you. You know, you've come here to Germany roughly a year ago since Russia waged war in your country. You are working here in Germany, but you have an interesting perspective insofar as that you don't necessarily consider yourself a journalist in exile. Could you tell us why?
Yes, thank you for having me here. I do not consider myself as a journalist in exile because in Ukraine we have freedom of speech. We, as an investigative journalist, of course, I had threats, and if shooting was too dangerous, I could get a bodyguard. But still, Ukraine is a free, democratic country, and this year, 2023, Reporters Without Borders, according to their rating of Freedom of Speech Index, Ukraine is on 79th place, but this is the best result for Ukraine since 2002, when Reporters Without Borders started making this rating. And the reason why I'm in Germany now is connected with Russian missiles and Russian crimes, because since the full invasion, Russia committed 518 crimes against media sphere. It includes kidnapping, murdering journalists, blowing TV towers. So this is the reason why I'm here, and actually my colleagues are dying every day. And for example, the last week, Ivan Shulga, sound engineer, he died because he was a soldier. Many of Ukrainian workers of media sphere are now joining the army, and he had a wife, a 9-year-old son. So for me, the main problem of being a journalist, for example, in exile, if we can say so, it's to feel this safety, but at the same time, this guilt, that I'm fine, I'm alive, and I have a great opportunity, a room to share the stories of my colleagues who are now there on the front line, and they have no opportunity to speak, and they are risking their life every day. It doesn't matter they are on the front line as soldiers or they are doing their job. So this is what the most painful moment for me.
Can, I can see you nodding when Anna talked about guilt. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Exactly, of course, I totally agree. We are enjoying a kind of freedom. But to be honest, I was dreaming of a total freedom here. But as long as your loved ones, your family members are in your own country, you cannot feel free totally. Because the government is, taking them hostages and using them against you. So everything you write, everything you talk here freely can endanger their lives there. So you have to consider. And then you start censoring yourself. And should I say this? You have reporters there, you have friends, and you know that if you say this word, then if you call him as a dictator, then one of your family members can be taken into custody the next morning. So this gives you the feeling of an exile. It's not so easy to do a free journalism, even in a free country.
This is something you were mentioning too, Fatih, that Eritrea is close to the bottom of press freedom. How difficult is it to keep up your work when the people that you might be trying to speak to at home can be severely punished for that?
Yeah, it's true. In a situation like in Eritrea, we advise our family members not to call us, simply because one call tapped by security it can send them to hell. Because they cannot defend the idea that we are calling our son who's living in France. They say we're sending him news and reports from inside. We ask them not to call, even if there is a chance to call. For us, 10 years of reporting about Eritrea, I'm sorry to say it, it's just like espionage, it's like spying. You have to make your net inside, and you have to make sure that this net does not fall in the hands of the security, because that means the loss of life. It's not a game, it's not a joke. Someone may lose his life for just sending news. It's absurd. I know, I understand. You can see it. That's one part of being in exile, where you cannot, in a country which is totally closed, you know. You cannot buy a telephone set unless you just register it at the police center, and then it can be wired and tapped, okay? So if you give it to someone else, you will end up in prison. This is the type of country that you have to report about, the stories and everything. Still, we are doing our best to just make the stories and not to compromise our credibility also, okay? And we have been successful now. This radio is an example. It has been reporting for 15 years. And the feedback from inside is very encouraging. People think it's a beacon of freedom. It gives the version of truth against that, prevailing one. So it's very hard. It's very complicated. And it's, in fact, has something to do with the loss of life. I remember in 2017, the radio I worked for, Radio Arena, won the BBC Board Award, the special award for the best media outlet in the third world in 2017. I gave the speech there, I received the award, and there was a meeting, and they wanted to know, how do we contact people inside? I said to them, I cannot talk about that. It is not just like, well, we do this and we have that person. No, because they can disappear. We cannot. So it's embarrassing, it's consuming, and it has all that, we are outside, we don't feel the freedom, and it's either you report and try to make your means and ways, the technology and everything. But internet there is not, you can report in some countries where there is internet service. The only company that provides the internet service is the Eritrean Telecommunication Service Company. Only one. So internet is a disaster there. So it's difficult.
I want to move on and talk about what we can do to make the work to help exiled journalists be able to carry out their work. We're going to tie this into a video about journalists in exile working in Kosovo who are from Afghanistan, if we can play that video. Maybe.
بعد از همکاران ما که از افغانستان آورده شدیم اینجا با اکسال تیوی همکاری میکنیم و بعضی از همکارای ما با تیوی های مختلف کار میکنن. اینا اینجا ریپورت میسازن درباره گزارش های افغانستان و همچنان افغان هایی که در کوسوو هستن ریپورت میسازن و اینا با تیوی که اکسال تیوی هست با اونا شریک میسازیم و اونا از طریق رسانه خودشون شریک میسازن.
Between working in Afghanistan and working in Kosovo, obviously the main thing is security and peace. So we are, as a journalist, we are responsible to raise our voice, we are responsible to report the situation in Afghanistan and what's going on against the girl, against the women.
This is a unique program which is financed by the government of Kosovo and German government, which enables journalists from Afghanistan who are at risk to come in Kosovo and continue their work. The reason we've offered this program is because in 1999 we experienced war, we were expelled from our country, and we know how it feels to be in another country as a refugee.
So even it's so hard to be optimistic about Afghanistan, about the situation it's right now, women and girls or the way they're suffering in Afghanistan. But I just wish, it's not a wish, I just try to at least to be useful for raising a voice and aware other part of the world to please aware of Afghanistan, please know about Afghanistan situation, please know about women and girls.
Zara Joya, just looking at that, some things stood out to me, the word responsibility, which we talked about earlier, a responsibility that does come at a cost. You know, you are carrying out similar work to your colleagues in Kosovo. What types of support and assistance do you need so that your work can be strengthened in the long term?
Well, for me, when I'm seeing this video and my fellow journalists, female journalists, it's very painful. You know, free media and independent journalists were a major achievement of Western efforts in Afghanistan. But now it struggles for survival. So that's absolutely painful and hard to speak about this. So that's okay. Some journalists are in safe country. They are working in exile. It's okay. We have a number of media organizations in exile, but it's I know it's very new experience for us. But when we are seeing and comparing the losing of the media freedom and the media, you know, that during this almost 2 years, we lost hundreds of media organizations. We lost our freedom, and unfortunately, the cost of telling the truth is very high. Journalists who are working independently, they are taking a high risk. They are putting themselves in a high danger. But after the collapse of Kabul, so there is no free media and independent journalists exist anymore in that country. So it is really, really hard for me to say I am working in exile. We really need, it's not our right to work in exile, right? Because for 20 years, for 2 decades, we struggled, we fought for our rights, but we lost overnight. But regarding to your questions, I think it's very important to at least work and raise the awareness about the situation of Afghanistan. You know, right now the Taliban banned international media coverage. At least, you know, some journalists that I spoke with them, they said we are, and that the Taliban blacklist, we are not allowed to go to that country, this country. And half of the populations, they just arrested at home, no education, no work, nothing. I think it's very good if we can continue our work by the support of the international community, by the support of ordinary people around the world. it's a very simple request from all of you that at least be our audience and speak and hear about the situation of that country.
Anna, I'd like to turn to you, and you know, we know journalists like yourself, there are many who are in exile outside of Ukraine. What things do they need to be able to continue their work?
Work itself, a place to work, and I think I'm pretty lucky because from almost the first day of my evacuation to Germany, I started working. It was kind of salvation for me, not to go crazy and be in depression. And Ukrainians, especially journalists, I can say that we are very proactive, so we are just going and knocking. So I would say that we need a place to work, and we need a trust in our knowing of the context, in our abilities, in our professionalism. And I know that Germany already helps in many ways for Ukrainian journalists in exile, Ukrainian refugee journalists, for example, with financial support, or equipment, or even creating separate exile, editorial offices. So this is the help every journalist needs, every journalist in exile, not only Ukrainian, everyone. We need a place to work, opportunity to work, and a trust.
Before we go to questions, Chandunda, I'd like to ask you about your long-term perspective. You had hoped that you would be able to return to Turkey after the election, but that wasn't to be with the re-election of President Erdogan. So you being able to return home is dependent on the political situation in Turkey. What are your long-term perspectives, and do you hold out hope that you will be able to do that?
I do, yeah, of course. That's for sure. That's why we are here. That's why we are struggling. But if you let me, I will contribute to this last question. What else we can do here? It depends mainly on the second question. I guess we need a kind of a network in the people working for the exile media. We have found each other here, for example. I mean, I have a lot of stories about Afghanistan and Taliban's connection with the Turkish government, for example, or Ukraine's, Erdogan's position between Ukraine and Russia. So we can discuss those issues together. And we need a network and a kind of an umbrella organization, I guess, so that in which we can share our experiences, share our stories together. We can produce together. We can contribute to our stories together. So I guess it's time, because Germany is getting more into turning into a hub for exile media. So we should use this opportunity. This is the first thing. Second thing is we need the support of the German media. They should open up their pages and screens to exile media workers here, so that we can contribute to their stories, or we can share our experiences with them. This is also important. When it comes to going back to the country, of course, my long-term vision is to support the creation of a free media in Turkey after this so-called revolution, let's say. And for example, nowadays I'm working on German experience, how they succeeded to have a free public media after the war. So we can learn a lot from German history, because, I mean, nowadays we are talking about the 70 years of Deutsche Welle, for example, or German media is a good example how we can create a new media over a ruin. That's also, there's a lot to learn from.
Fatih Osman, I was wondering if you had anything to chime in there.
First, I would like to say something. The African exile journalist is underprivileged. He's at the bottom, or she is at the bottom. When you go ask for, there is, governments and NGOs deal in portions and situations. When you go and ask for some help, they say, priority Syrians. You just go the second year, priority Afghanistan. You go third year, priority Ukraine. You are not there. you cannot have anything. You fight to get help. Now, I heard the speech of Excellency, the Minister, Mrs. Baerbock, talking about Hannah Arendt Initiative. I hope this extends to African journalists in exile. I don't know, I have no idea, but I hope it at least, we would like to get out of this, category and mandate that deprives exiled African journalists from help. And this is one of so to just break this circle, I think it can be a very important step in helping exiled journalists.
We're almost running out of time. I just want to ask the control room if we have time for one quick question. Okay, so we have a gentleman here in a blue shirt. Could you stand up, please, and we'll bring a microphone over to you. If you could just keep your question fairly brief, that would be great.
Thank you so much. I'm Vadud Solangi, working for Deutsche Welle Afghanistan Department. My question is, founding and supporting the exile media are an option for the journalists who are leaving the countries. But what are the solutions and options for the media and journalists who are still in the countries like Afghanistan to survive as an independent media? For how long should we leave our countries? For how long should we found exile media? It is not, I think it is not a solution for long term. Then what do you think? What should the international community do for Afghanistan, for Iran, for Turkey, or for Ukraine? Thank you so much.
Who wants to answer that? Chandunda.
A lot. The international community can do a lot. There are still brave journalists working in our countries trying to inform the public, but they are at risk and they are under really heavy risk. Let me give you an example. Deutsche Welle Turkish, they are doing really great job and they are offering objective news, but Deutsche Welle website is banned in Turkey. And I was expecting a strong reaction from the German government. I haven't heard of it. Not strong, but even the reaction didn't come. So if you cannot defend the free media in those countries, even your own media, how can you protect the others? So we have to defend those people fighting for democracy and human rights and press freedom strongly. And we need this solidarity.
I think that's all we've... Okay, very quick, Sarah.
Thank you. Just one thing that I think it's really important that the international community at least break their silence and hear about what is saying people inside of Afghanistan or other countries that they are in conflict zone. For Afghanistan concept, I'm sure it is not, I agree with you, it's not solution. But it is an option. For now, for this moment, we can't leave our country alone. We can't leave our people without reporting or informing. But at this moment, it is a best option to work and continue documenting this situation.
Thank you so much, and please thank our panel for very wonderful, courageous journalists. Thank you.